The Dardeens, Russell Keith Dardeen, 29, Ruby Elaine Dardeen, 30, and their son Peter, 2, lived in Ina, Illinois, in a trailer they bought in 1986. The trailer sat on rented land. Keith worked as a treatment plant operator at the Wren Lake Water Conservancy District's nearby facility. Elaine worked at an office supply store in Mount Vernon. The couple were part-time members of a musical ensemble at a nearby Baptist church. In 1987, Elaine was pregnant with their second child. This led the couple to strongly consider moving since they didn't consider the environment around to be right for their children. Keith's concern wasn't unjustified. The area around had become too violent. Jefferson County recorded 15 homicides in the last 2 years. As a result, the trailer was put up for sale in late 1987. Due to the alarming rate of new criminal incidents and their increasing brutal nature, Keith became extremely protective of his family, going so far as to not letting a young woman in his house when asked if she could make a phone call. On November 18, Keith didn't report at work. It was unusual for a worker as reliable as him. Neither did he inform in advance that he wouldn't be able to report to work that day, nor did he answer any calls from work. Both his parents, who were divorced, were called. Neither of them knew the reason of Keith's unusual day off work. Don Dardeen, Keith's father, called the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and planned to go to Keith's house with the house key and meet deputies there. Inside the home, they found out the bodies of Elaine, Peter, and the newborn girl. Keith and Elaine had beforehand decided to name the child Casey, if it would be a girl, and Ian, if it would be a boy. All the bodies were tucked in the same bed. All three were beaten to death with a baseball bat, which was gifted to Peter by Keith earlier in 1987. Elaine was beaten so severely that she went into labor and delivered a girl, who suffered the same fate as Elaine and Peter. Elaine was bound and gagged with a duct tape. Both Keith and his car were missing, 1981 red Plymouth. Initial assumption was that Keith killed his family and fled. His mother's house in Mount Carmel was searched by armed policemen. The search ended the following day's evening. Keith was still missing. A group of hunters found Keith's body in a wheat field, south to the Franklin-Jefferson County line, not too far from the trailer. He had been shot thrice and his genitals were mutilated. His penis was severed. Keith's car was found outside Benton Police Station, 11 miles south of the Dardeen home. His Plymouth's interior was splattered with blood. Illinois State Police and local police forces jointly investigated this case. 30 detectives worked full-time following leads and interviewed 100 people. None of what they found proved fruitful to the investigation. A colleague of Keith, with whom he had a dispute early on, was cleared after interrogation. The public image of the Dardeens was absolutely impeccable, and nobody in their circle had anything bad to say about them. A small quantity of marijuana was found in the trailer, but due to its minuscule quantity, the possibility of the Dardeens dealing in illicit substances was ruled out. No drugs or alcohol were found in the victim's autopsy. The time of death for all the Dardeens were put at within an hour of each other by the coroners. The bodies in the trailer had been killed 12 hours before they were found, and Keith had been dead for 24 to 36 hours before he was found. This only made it harder to determine how the crime had been committed, since Keith's body was found away from the trailer, and he may have been killed at that location rather than with his family, since his car's interior was splattered with blood. At the trailer, the killer or killers had apparently taken the time to not only tuck Elaine's body into bed along with her children's bodies but also to clean up the scene, which suggests that either the killer/killers had no hurry to leave or were extremely experienced, due to which time wasn't an issue. The amount of effort involved led police to theorize that the crime may have taken place at night. To add to the suspicion, the trailer was on Route 37, which was a busy state highway. The question on whether there was one killer or more still remained an open, unanswered question. Determining the motive of this killing was another major difficulty for the law enforcement. The back door had been left open. There was no sign of forced entry. A portable camera and a VCR, videocassette recorder, were found kept in plain sight in the living room of the trailer. All the cash and jewelry was found untouched, all of which argued against the possibility of robbery being a motive. Elaine had not been raped or sexually assaulted. Police also found no evidence of any extramarital affairs involving either Keith or Elaine that might have motivated the other party to a jealous rage. A stack of papers with sports scores found in the house prompted the law enforcement to wonder whether Keith was involved in sports betting and might have incurred gambling debts which he would have failed to pay back. To counter this theory, Joanne Dardeen, Keith's mother, told the police that Keith was extremely frugal. He even raised money for Peter's college fund by reselling 50-cent soda cans at work. Despite the fear and rumors the case engendered, police believe that the Dardeens were targeted for some reason or the other owing to the cruelty evident in the case, contrary to the widespread local belief of them being randomly chosen. The most common local rumor regarding this case was that the Dardeens were murdered by a satanic cult, but police ruled out this possibility. Police officers who specialized in satanic cult murders ruled out the involvement of a cult in this case, the reason being the fact that such cults usually often would mutilate bodies more extensively, harvest organs, and leave symbols and lit candles at the scene of their crimes, none of which were found at the crime scene. One theory police didn't rule out completely was the Dardeens being victims of mistaken identity. Joanne Dardeen believed that, quoting her, "I think someone wanted Keith to sell drugs and he refused," she said in 1997. Or there's a possibility someone liked Elaine and she wouldn't accept his advances and he took out his rage on both of them. We just don't know. Both of the aforementioned theories were ruled out by police. Eventually, the police exhausted all leads and started working on other cases. Joanne tried her best to not let the case become cold, and tried to keep the public from losing interest in the case. Angel Maturino Resendez briefly drew police's attention after his surrender to authorities in 1999. He was an itinerant who traveled around by hopping freight trains, chose his victims near train tracks and beat them to death. While those elements suggested the Dardeen killings, authorities in Illinois were never able to connect him to the crime. On December 31, 1999, Tommy Lynn Sells slit the throats of two girls in Del Rio, Texas, one of whom survived and helped the police in identifying him. He was eventually caught, convicted, and sentenced to death. While awaiting trial, he began confessing to other murders he had committed while drifting. One of them was the Dardeen family's case. Sells initially didn't remember the details of all the crimes he admitted to. Sells often hitched rides with truckers or hop freights. It was via these trips that he became familiar with Ina. Sells claimed in 2010 that it was November 1987 that he met Keith at a truck stop in Mount Vernon, and in a different retelling, at a local pool hall. In both versions, he claims Keith invited him to dinner at home with his family. After the dinner, Sells planned to leave, but claims that Keith triggered his anger by sexually propositioning him, according to one account, to a threesome with Elaine. He forced Keith at gunpoint to drive to where his body was found, killed and mutilated him, then returned to the trailer to kill Elaine and Peter, who were witnesses, although he says it was at the time the result of uncontrollable rage that Keith's alleged sexual offer had set off in him. In a third version, there was no mention of an encounter with Keith and the sexual preposition. According to that account, Sells he got off a freight he had hopped near Ina. When he saw the Dardeen trailer with its "for sale" sign, he saw an opportunity for a killing. After drinking beers and waiting for the right time, he knocked on the door and told a wary Keith he was interested in buying the trailer. He then overpowered Keith, made him bind and gag his wife and son with duct tape, forced him to drive his car to a nearby field at gunpoint, where he sliced Keith's penis off, telling him he was going to take it back to Elaine, then shot him and left it there. At the trailer he raped Elaine, then beat Peter, Elaine and the newborn to death. After cleaning up he drove Keith's car to Benton. Tommy Lynn Sells was never charged with the murder of the Dardeens, but always remained the number one suspect. The county deputy sheriff who interviewed Sells in his Texas cell says he knew details of the crime that had been kept confidential. They agree that Sells may have added details to his story, as he was known to do, something that has left considerable doubt about many of the killings he confessed to. Interestingly, Sells' account is consistent with the general facts of the case. They say, most of what he told them had previously been reported publicly. When Sells was asked about some information that has been withheld from media accounts of the killing, he seemed less reliable. His claim as to which seat of Keith's Plymouth he was shot in is belied by the evidence. And when asked how Elaine's body was positioned, he at first answered incorrectly, then correctly, which may have been a guess. Police, though confirmed that Sells was responsible for 22 murders, but believed that Sells was trying to imitate Henry Lee Lucas, and was trying to avoid the death penalty by confessing to crimes he didn't commit. And due to this, Illinois State Police wanted to take Sells to Ina so they could see how well he knew the area and the locations relevant to the crimes. Sells claimed he could lead them to missing evidences. However, Texas law does not allow prisoners on death row to be taken out of the state, and authorities were reluctant to make an exception to the rule. Doubts about Sells' confession were widespread among the family and friends of the Dardeens. They doubt that Keith would have invited home someone from out of town whom he had just met to have dinner with the family, especially given the heightened fear in the area after all the killings over the preceding 2 years. A friend said, "If he wouldn't let a young girl in to use the phone, he wouldn't let a 22-year-old man in." My opinion on various theories. The killer being a paramour of either Keith or Elaine, despite the police being able to find no evidence of any extramarital affairs, I personally can't rule out this possibility. The savage violence this family had to suffer during this entire ordeal points out to a personal angle. Either the killer was somebody Elaine was involved with and had cut contact with due to having a second child and jilted, he would have wanted to kill Keith due to jealousy, or him being in the way. Likewise, it's possible that Keith was involved with someone has left her due to him now having the responsibility of 2 children, and the lady would have felt wronged and thus decided to take revenge. It is, in my assessment, a very likely possibility. Tommy Lynn Sells being the killer, since Sells is the #1 suspect in the case, I almost believe he was the one to do it, but there are still some questions in my mind, which are as follows. Sells was 5 feet 9 inches, 195 pounds and 23 years old at the time. I seriously doubt if he would have had what it takes to kill so many people the way they were killed. He wasn't particularly big or buff and was pretty young at that time. Since Keith was shot, Sells would have had a firearm with him. Was there any attempted fight back by Keith? If there was a fight back, Sells could have been overpowered and disarmed. The only way I see this possible is either Sells attacked Keith by surprise, knocked him out cold, restrained him and then carried on with the killings. I think Sells having an accomplice is more likely. Possibility of a killer couple, fairly possible situation. A really evil armed couple could have done this too. But I'd still keep the possibility somewhat low than the first 2 possibilities. Mob killing. The possibility of this being the case is high when the case is viewed from the cruelty aspect, but the Dardeens not being involved with such people drives down the possibility. Another way I see this is probably if there was significant gang activity in the area. These murders could have been some sort of initiation ritual, but again, it's just speculation. Gambling debts. The possibility of this being the likely scenario is low too, since despite there being papers with sports scores in the house, Joanne said that Keith was too frugal, so I don't think Keith was involved in gambling, but even if we assume for a while that he was, I don't think people who'd collect debt would be this evil. Possibility of a satanic cult being involved. This may seem ridiculous, but it is a weak possibility. The savagery meted out to the victims is present in satanic sacrifices, animal or human. As far as the question of no candles or ritual marks being present goes, I think they could have purposely avoided it to avoid easy detection, but still this ranks as a pretty low possibility. So, here are all the likely possibilities I could think of. You all are free to provide any others. Pretty sad and horrific case all around. Note: I'd like to apologize for errors regarding facts or language. English isn't my first language, so I guess you all would understand. I tried my best, if any. I'd also like to thank you all for reading my entire post. The main purpose of this is, since this case unsettles and disturbs me every time I'm reminded of it, I decided to write a long post stating all facts, theories et al. I possibly could.